Alan John Dixon, the man who actually carried out the decommissioning stroke demolition in 1968 of Shell Thornton's secret nuclear research reactor, is buried here in Ormskirk, Lancashire. I've now established that I first met Alan John Dixon in 1969, possibly 1970. Upon meeting Alan, within a space of days, a week or so, he told me, quote, "I'm the only man in the country who's demolished a radioactive strontium-90 testing cell." At the time, I dismissed it as a piece of pub talk. However, as the 1970s rolled on, Alan's nuclear decommissioning pride increasingly turned to apprehension, as a seemingly endless series of stories were written broadcast regarding nuclear radiation. His concerns were all the greater as a realisation dawned on Alan as to the link between the nuclear decommissioning and the fact that post-Thornton, both his wife and his brother Derek's wife had given birth to a series of aborted deformed children. Derek was a site foreman for Thornton's nuclear reactor decommissioning. The levels of deformity were such that both sets of parents were independently advised not to view their newly born children. Missing, partly deformed limbs and other such deformities were such that the children that survived birth were all allowed to die and or died. Prior to Thornton, neither Alan or Derek or either of their wives had ever experienced any such problems. Despite Alan's expressed concerns, and Derek's and others, and especially his distress over his aborted children, he was to have no more children, Alan. I could not believe that a company the size of Shell, maybe the largest company on the planet, hired known criminals with a previous history of dumping nuclear waste, paying them enormous cash sums in order to decommission a secret reactor at Thornton. It was just inconceivable. However, in 1983, I was studying nuclear physics, teaching myself a fundamental misunderstanding of nuclear physics. And I was reciting something over and over again. And Alan interceded with a point about it. And although Alan was very bright, Alan was no intellectual. There was absolutely no way that Alan Dixon would have studied nuclear physics. And I asked him how he knew that, because it was a very advanced piece I was reciting, and he said, "Isn't it funny how it comes back?" That's what the nuclear scientists said at Thornton. That's what Alan always called the Harwell people at Thornton, the nuclear scientists. I knew there and then that this was not an ordinary demolition job, and there was something very, very strange. Without telling Alan or anybody else, I started to research Shell and its nuclear involvement.
Potential enemies, public opinion is growing in favour of compulsory national service.
Following the outbreak of war in 1939, a new government department was formed to coordinate the supply of equipment to all three branches of the armed forces. The newly formed Armed Forces Ministry of Supply, MOS, was housed at Shell's headquarters, Shell Mex House, the Strand, London. During the Second World War, the Ministry of Supply was directing the most secret of undertakings, for as part of the UK's war effort, Britain was making a substantial, mainly scientific, contribution to the Manhattan Project, i.e. the atomic bomb. However, British hopes of any meaningful post-war US-UK nuclear cooperation were cut short by the passing of the US 1946 Atomic Energy Act, the so-called McMahon Act, which set out how the United States would from now on take full control, manage and restrict the nuclear technology it had jointly developed with its wartime allies, Britain and Canada. With the passing of the McMahon Act, Britain and British-foreign companies would now be excluded from US nuclear involvement, knowledge and participation. The Act indicated the enormous national investment the United States would be making into the development of nuclear energy. For Shell, the world's leading energy provider, the prospect of a new form of energy that would be, as its proponents claim, too cheap to monitor was a nightmare scenario. Furthermore, the Shell Group was now, with the passing of the McMahon Act, being excluded from US nuclear participation. Meanwhile, its main competitors, Standard Oil, Texaco and Esso, being US companies, had no such foreign restrictions. For Shell, this was a potential disaster. However, unbeknown to all but a selected few, the nuclear restrictions imposed on the group by the McMahon Act did not exclude Shell from military and other nuclear research programs, for Shell was, from the outset, central to the United Kingdom's nuclear program.
With President Truman on the atomic bomb. The Prime Minister refers to America in relation to the atomic problem.
Today, the United States stands out as the mightiest power on earth.
The new Labour government's attempt at international collective order was to have a limited life. Palestine, UK, US fallout, Soviet Middle East penetration combined with the United States rejection of UK-US nuclear cooperation was to contribute to the realisation of the limitation of Attlee's international cooperation ambitions. Despite the Attlee government's instrumental role in the creation of the US Western Europe Collective Defence Organisation, NATO, an independent British nuclear weapons programme bomb was deemed still to be essential. The decision to start the atomic bomb project was secretly taken by a small inner cabinet group unbeknown to the rest of the cabinet. In January 1947, Attlee summons his small inner group to a special meeting at Shell Mex House, Shell's headquarters, to authorise the production of an atomic bomb, so that the UK's atomic bomb was set out, authorised, planned and developed from Shell's headquarters. Not only was Shell at the heart of Britain's nuclear programmes from their inception, it would go on and supply essential nuclear components for the successful development building of the UK's atomic bomb and subsequent nuclear power reactor. Directorate of Atomic Energy, Shell's headquarters, plans communicated to John Cockcroft regarding the building of Europe's first nuclear reactor. Until the 1954 United Kingdom Atomic Energy Act, the Ministry of Supply was responsible for all of the UK's atomic establishments. A few samples of important nuclear and other patents drawn up at Shell's headquarters.
Klaus Fuchs was a German scientist who'd fled from Germany because he was a communist rather than a Jew. But because of his brilliance and his opposition to the Nazis, he was soon co-opted into Britain's atomic bomb program.
Fuchs was actually arrested at Shell Mex House, Shell's headquarters. Its significance lies in the fact that the head of theoretical physics, Harwell, was no stranger to Shell's headquarters. What it discovered in Shell was, in my judgment, extraordinary. So extraordinary, it obviously warranted further investigation. To show how extraordinary it was, just envisage a scenario where America and the Americans' nuclear policy was designed, envisaged, planned with inside an oil company's headquarters. Not only that, its nuclear weapons programs were started with inside and planned with inside an oil company's headquarters, and the oil company, incidentally, would have a direct interest in dishing nuclear research and nuclear power, because it certainly wasn't in the oil giants' interest to further nuclear research in nuclear power and nuclear energy. And furthermore, the American president in this scenario would go along, deceiving most of his own cabinet, go along to this private corporation's headquarters, unbeknown to most of his own cabinet, and give the okay, the sanction for the American nuclear weapons programs. It is quite unbelievable what actually happened at Shell and the UK, but that's what did happen. Furthermore, of course, they went on to develop secret nuclear patents, all from inside Shell's headquarters. These nuclear patents were very, very valuable at the time, considered to be of immense value, national value. They weren't written and drawn up outside of Shell's headquarters. They weren't drawn up in Whitehall. Presumably they were too valuable to be drawn up in Whitehall, but not too valuable for Shell's and Shell's headquarters. Having overcome the McMahon obstacles by virtue of its central UK nuclear possession, Shell were now confronted with new dangers. On the 19th of July 1954, the Atomic Energy Bill received royal assent. The resulting act gave birth to the UK AEA. With the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority now taking statutory control, Shell's crucial nuclear position was no longer guaranteed. The implication for the Shell Group were all too apparent. On the 13th of October 1954, a matter of weeks after the UKA came into being, Shell formed a new company to afford it protection. Thus, Shell Research Limited was duly formed to take over Shell UK Research and especially its Thornton Research Centre. Shell Research Limited's structure is important. Note the inverted commas around Shell. These will become significant in the Thornton decommissioning. 17th of January 1956, Shell's nuclear expansion is set out in a letter to the Atomic Energy Authority's chairman. Note radiation chemistry, the chemical effects of nuclear and other radiations on matter. This was to have a wide interpretation at Thornton. The Atomic Energy Authority was assured that Shell's proliferating nuclear ambitions / projects would not impede its existing nuclear undertakings to the authority. I now needed to authenticate the nuclear decommissioning allegations. Fishgold and his son are buried at Allerton Cemetery, Liverpool. Israel Fishgold was by all accounts a devout religious man. His son, Sidney David Fishgold, did not unfortunately inherit his father's moral rectitude. Universally known as Curly and or the Curly, was a larger-than-life petty criminal. 1968, Curly Fishgold's Merseyside Dismantling and Demolition Limited were awarded a contract to remove / transport radioactive waste resulting from the decommissioning of Liverpool University cyclotron to the Liverpool docks, where it was then to be loaded and dumped into the Irish Sea. However, Curly thought this was a waste of good scrap.
The university, and that was it was all segments of copper and lead and everything. It was something like radioactive again, as far as I know, and it had to be dumped in the North Sea or something. But I believe
Yes.
I said I don't want to have nothing to do with it.
Delivered to a scrapyard, a local scrapyard, when it should have been delivered to a boat parked, a ship parked on the docks. And at the end of the day, the scrapyard was closed down because of the contaminated lead.
Was Curly prosecuted?
As far as I remember, yes, he was. What happened to him, I've no idea. What the result of that was, I've no idea.
I can now unequivocally state that Sidney David Fishgold was arrested by Liverpool police for the theft of radioactive waste. However, this setback quickly turned out to be a substantial financial blessing in disguise for Curly. 37A St Anne Street, Curly's office had a compulsory purchase order placed on it in 1968, as it was designated to be demolished as part of a slum clearance programme, though his office could not actually inspire great confidence, especially to a transnational corporation. Furthermore, Curly kept the inside of his office in a suitable state, as he did not want to encourage any creditors. His office was demolished in 1970.
Two men appeared. In the office was Fishgold, Ingalls and myself. They introduced themselves to Ingalls as being representatives from Thornton Research or Shellmex. Shortly after I left the office and left them to it.
Was there any indication that you think that they simply walked in unannounced, that they picked him out the boot?
I have no idea really, but I don't believe for 1 minute they were picked out the book. Why pick them out the book when, within whistling distance of the job, you had Sir Alfred McAlpine's, Monks and big multinational companies? Why pick someone out the book to do a demolition job? It's ridiculous.
Shell had originally claimed they'd simply chosen Mersey demolition from the Liverpool phone book. There was a major stumbling block to Shell's claim that they simply picked them out the phone book. They weren't listed in either the phone book or the yellow pages. The reasons for seeking Curly Fishgold out, are self-evident. Once they'd secured his services, they'd pay him enormous sums, jaw-dropping sums of money. And then Shell would go to extraordinary lengths, as I will show, to cover it up, or do their best to cover up his involvement. Once the terms were agreed with Shell, Curly subcontracted the nuclear decommissioning to Alan Dixon.
Present at the meeting was Curly, a couple of nuclear scientists who I was informed came from Harwell, Colin Bradbury, the chief engineer for Thornton Research Centre, and myself. I was then shown round the job and informed that it was a demolition job of a strontium-90 radioactive testing cell, and that the main purpose of the job was to remove strontium-90 radioactive rods or tubes from which were embedded in the concrete.
December 2013, John Dye and Derek Dixon. Derek, can you just confirm that I've just knocked on your door, and we've had no about these documents I'm going to show you, ask you to look at.
That's correct.
Right, Derek, can you just have a look at these photos, pictures, please? And if anything comes to mind.
No, not at all.
Right, put them on one side. Have a careful look, Derek. It's not but there's anything in the pictures you recognise.
Yeah. Yeah, well, these stud-like things are very, what was embedded in the concrete.
What? Just forgive me. Show me the photograph to the camera. And you're saying what?
Those sorts of pellets that were embedded in the...
Pellet? You're talking about the tubes?
Yeah, yeah.
Were there that number of tubes, roughly, or less, or more, or was that the sort of thing that you were confronted with?
That's about right, yeah.
Would you put that on a separate...
That's about right.
Is it?
As I said, I said they were full of mushrooms of...
But they're not mushrooms, are they? They're tubes.
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, you must
No,
only...
but you can only see them from the front, really, can't you? You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you and your brother Alan were talking about all the tubes, that's what you were talking about, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. There were no men when we were there.
No.
You know, but the actual building itself is very similar to what I remember.
Just show that to the camera, please.
But there were no people working there at the time.
No.
It had been all the machinery and everything all been stripped out. It was just hollow.
But that brings to mind...
That brings to mind the actual, what we demolished.
Yeah. Or what you couldn't demolish.
What we couldn't demolish. And this one's very similar, isn't it? Well, actually, all that's in them is that wall.
Yeah.
Which is very identical to what we took away. Because everything else in it, you've got people in it and equipment in it that wasn't there when we...
Show it to the camera, Derek, please.
This has been removed. We were left with what was just the actual, apart from a few lined up switches on the wall and things of that nature.
And these were the tubes and amongst the parts that the Harwell people were desperate to get hold of.
Yeah, they were the things that were to go in the drums. Yes, that's exactly what it looks like and was.
Show it to the camera, please.
Why is it numbered?
The Hatton project was formed, of course, again, this was all very theoretical back in those days, but there were several different technologies that were being studied with regard.
The prints that Derek had identified were of a graphite research reactor's face wall. The Thornton pipes were in fact Shell's reactors, experiment and feed tubes. In order to carry out the decommission of Thornton's reactor, Drop 955 was on site plus a dozen or so tipper wagons. The number of wagons varied as the ability of the Drop to load the wagons would vary due to site conditions.
Hydraulic hammer on it, and the chisel was like that, and the concrete was that tough that I think they broke 2 or 3 chisels on it. Yeah.
The on-site Harwell staff had specialist remote-controlled equipment to enable them to collect the most toxic waste. Once the first set of nuclear drums was filled, Alan was assured clean drums would be supplied. However,
can you describe the barrels to us?
Only very roughly, it's such a long time ago. I would think there was 40, 50 barrels in a row as you came onto the, as you headed towards the main part of the site, the centre of the site. The barrels were in a row on the right hand side, lined up against another building which didn't get demolished. Quite clearly marked on each barrel was the nuclear sign. I was told that them barrels had come from Harwell. The pipes, etc., had to be put into those barrels when they would be sent back to Harwell.
This, yes, these drums were there. That's exactly what they look like.
Just forgive me, Dad. Are you positive that's what they were like?
That's exactly what they look like, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we were supposed to put in, but in fact we didn't put anything in.
Mm.
What I do remember is that they didn't get half an inch of pipe. They didn't get one piece of pipe out of the whole building.
Was there some concern by these people?
Yeah, they stopped the job. Once I reported to them, to Bradbury, that we couldn't get the pipes out, the job was stopped. A meeting was held between Bradbury, one or two other people I don't know, wasn't introduced to, and the scientists. We weren't invited over to the meeting. Bradbury left the meeting, came over to me and said, we'll just carry on with other work until later, we'll have another meeting. After lunch they had another meeting. Bradbury called me over and said, carry on. It's impossible to, well, he first of all he asked me, is it impossible to get the pipes out? I said yes. And he told me that it's been decided to carry on, but they never got half an inch of pipe.
Waste that was planned to be loaded into the nuclear barrels must have been of significant toxicity, for unlike Liverpool University's nuclear waste, disposal at sea was not an option. Now in the 1960s, all but the most toxic nuclear waste was deemed to be acceptable for discharging into the ocean. To make matters more stark, Shell had its very own port, so to speak, with its Stanlow oil terminal within walking distance of the Thornton site, so it would have been the easiest of operations to transport the filled barrels to its Stanlow oil terminal and then discharge them into the sea. But no, all retrieved nuclear barrel waste had to make a 180-mile plus trip to Harwell rather than a couple of miles or so to Shell's Stanlow dock for sea disposal. Remember, the people that were desperate to retrieve this particular waste were engaged in dumping a nuclear reactor, so we can state with a degree of certainty, conviction, that this particular waste fell into the most dangerous category of nuclear waste. Thus, its eventual dumping onto an urban population makes it even more shocking.
Throughout the period, did the Harwell team continually have and use the Geiger counters?
Yes, they did. Every time they approached the maze or went into any of the other buildings, they were always armed with their Geiger counters. On each occasion, definitely yes.
And were they always dressed the same?
Yes, always in their white. The Geiger, the Geiger counters were used in all of the buildings, not just on the maze, and in all of the buildings to varying degrees. They did make quite a loud clatter.
And did you see where it was clashing on any of the buildings that you were demolishing prior to the maze?
Oh, definitely.
And they knew that that was being taken out?
Yes, definitely. There was stuff being sent off the site before the actual main part of the demolition, which was the demolition of the maze, which contained the rods or tubes.
Did anyone at any time query where it was going?
No, never. No one ever bothered at all. No one.
The Geiger counters were used on other than the maze. Can you just elaborate on that?
Well, there was, as I say, there was approximately 3 buildings. One of them housed the maze. There was various types of equipment in the other 2 buildings, and on a few occasions, scientists did go into them buildings to examine certain equipment, complete with their Geiger counters, which, depending where they were pointing them Geiger counters, they would clatter quite rapidly or very slowly. In fact, I would say that no one ever came near the maze with or without their Geiger counters. I can remember that scientists did approach the outer circumference of the job with the Geiger counters, and the Geiger counters reacting quite violently, but they never went into the centre. Never.
So on each occasion when they were talking about the tubes, they talked about it, as it were, from a distance.
Okay, exactly.
Yes, that's how they were dressed.
Now, can you just show that to the camera, please? Is that precise, roughly how they were dressed up?
Roughly how they were dressed.
Yeah, but that immediately brings to mind, does it, how they were?
Yeah.
You say the first building you've ever... Have you ever subsequently come across a building like that?
No, not ever. No.
Have you ever heard of anybody?
No.
You know the people in the suits with the Geiger counters and the mask, etc., etc. Do you clearly remember them?
Oh, clearly remember them, yeah. We were surprised, actually, because we hadn't been given any warnings about anything. So when we saw men appear and all dolled up, we became a bit concerned about it, didn't we?
Do you remember the Geiger counters?
I remember the Geiger counters.
Can you remember anything about them?
Not really, no.
Can you remember, as Alan alleges, that they click violently?
Well,
when...
they were making a noise, yeah, but as to the physical destruction...
Oh, no, I don't mean that. I mean, can you remember when they went close?
Them clicking and clacking, yeah.
And did they go in high intensity or low intensity?
Well, they went quicker and slower, depending on the proximity to the building and what parts they were pointing them at.
The Harwell team, did they constantly have their Geiger counters?
Yes, wherever they went, they always had the Geiger counters. If they went into one of the other buildings, they always had the Geiger counters. And as I say, they're in various parts of the building, the Geiger counters would either clatter a lot faster or a lot slower. Every time that they walked towards the maze, which was in the process of demolition, the same thing would happen as they walked towards it, so the Geiger counters would clatter. But they never went in the centre, or for that matter, stepped on any concrete. They always stayed on the outer part of the site.
Cash payments. This is the one occasion when Alan was reluctant to go into details on camera. He'd had a stroke and he was concerned about the tax liabilities. He was given 3 envelopes, cash, where he would take to the bank where Kelly would meet him. On each occasion, the sums were £5,000 each, so there were 3 £5,000 cash payments. Alan received £1,000 on each occasion. On the last occasion, Eddie Ingle and Curly were at the bank when he got this final £5,000 payment. Now, according to Alan, I have no means of verifying this, Curly came to the job and he received these envelopes and he went off on his own. I have no means of verifying that, as I say. I suspect that the 3 payments were 2 stage payments, which is standard on the job, and a final payment. However, Alan, although he got £3,000 in total, would have been delighted just to have the job because of the vast sums of money he was getting from the quantities of scrap that was going off site. All that was sold. There was 3 wagon loads, according to Alan, possibly more, of copper alone. And all he had to pay was a small group of workers, because all the plant and machinery was all paid for by Shell.
Given an envelope, which presumed was a cheque, but I've no idea whether it was or it wasn't. I took it to the bank, passed it into the bank, this was the next morning, they passed over a bundle of money. I've no idea how much money was there. I left the bank, directly outside the bank, Ingalls and Fishgold in the car. I got in the car, passed the money across to Fishgold and got paid out by Fishgold. That's it.
Did you sign for the money?
No.
No one asked you?
No, nothing, no. Just purely passed the envelope over. They took it away and brought back a bundle of money which was wrapped up. They didn't count it out to me, ever. The peculiar thing about the job was the amount of copper cable that was suddenly took off it, which filled approximately 3 7.5 ton tipper wagons full. It was colossal amounts of cable that we took off the job.
Have you ever come across that amount of cable for that sort of...
No, never. To the bank, actually what happened is I went to meet Colin Bradbury. He handed me the cheque. I then drove down to their local bank in Ellesmere Port, presented the cheque and was handed a large bundle of money wrapped up. How much money was there, I've no idea.
How usual is it for large companies to pay cash?
Well, it's most unusual. I would say never.
What do you mean by an open cheque, Eddie?
You could just go in with it,
Yeah.
sign it, and you got cash.
Well, that's what Alan said. There was no questions asked. They were waiting for... They knew we was coming.
Yeah.
And he would then...
They must have phoned the bank and told them there's a cheque, they'd be coming to pick it up and they want cash, yeah. They must have done, because when I went, he was only in there 10 minutes and come out, and I think I got 2 and Curly got 2 and Alan got
1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. Despite Shell's payments, the job was stopped. For now that the reactor's outer buildings had been moved, the painfully slow progress the hydraulic hammer was making was exacerbated by the amount of dust it was creating. Dust that was now freely flowing across the Shell's site. It was proposed that a demolition wrecking ball would now be tried, in order to try and split open the reactor, as it were, and thereby retrieve the mandatory waste. Locally hired wrecking ball and cranes were found wanting. The job was once again stopped as the country's alleged mightiest demolition wrecking ball and crane was imported from the northeast of England. Unless one has witnessed a demolition wrecking ball in action, it is difficult to envisage their destructive power. This is a standard wrecking ball, a type that was found to be inadequate for Shell Thornton's reactor decommissioning. It's worth contemplating for a moment why Shell would send to the northeast of England for a substantial crane and tub. Because on the Stanlow complex, there would be any number of cranes, vast cranes, enormous cranes, far superior to anything they're likely to be able to hire. The reason they sent to the northeast of England for the crane and tub was because they did not wish the knowledge of this demolition, this decommissioning, to get out onto the Shell site. With the arrival of the northeast crane and tub, the decommissioning was restarted. However, there was to be no Easter egg outcome, i.e. the reactor did not split apart to reveal its most toxic elements. In fact, the 5-ton wrecking ball's end product turned out to be at best a pummelling action, as it repeatedly swung into the dense reactor. Furthermore, the wrecking ball was generating large amounts of dust, nuclear dust, that was being really blown across the Shell complex and further afield.
Because in the course of the demolition with this 5-ton tub, everything was just destroyed. Everything. We battered the concrete to basically dust.
And what was their reaction to that?
Well, they were quite upset, but the method of demolition was carried out under their instructions to split the concrete open with a 5-ton tub, which proved completely impossible to do. When I finally informed them that we couldn't retrieve the tubes. They then called a site meeting with senior persons from the Thornton Research and themselves. We were never invited to that site meeting, but we were present when it took place. At the end of that site meeting, we were simply told to carry on and send the lot off.
Did you detect any friction or disagreement between Harwood
Oh, it
and
was
Shell?
quite a heated site meeting, discussion, yeah, definitely.
When they had this meeting, what state was the pile in?
Well, we'd completely removed the outer building that the pile was housed in. We'd smashed the top off the pile, the roof. Informed me to carry on with the demolition as normal, send everything off the site.
And what use was the drums to be?
Just complete utter waste of time.
What went in the drums?
Nothing. Not a thing. Nothing.
Did any drums leave with anything in?
No. Not one drum left. Everything, total, went off the site.
So every 20 minutes or so, 10 tons of nuclear waste was going out in full view of the scientists and their staff at Shell.
Yes, definitely.
Now, every 20 minutes or so, 10 tons of nuclear and other waste was loaded onto a few waiting tippers. Literally thousands of tons of nuclear radioactive waste was shipped out of Thornton to be dumped anywhere as long as it did not remain on Shell's site. By December 68, all the nuclear waste had been shipped out. Now Alan Dixon crew were importing materials to fill the enormous hole that had been created as a consequence of disposing of the reactor's underground structure, stroke cellar. The reactor's underground structure was substantial and very deep. It was so deep that the bulldozer had to construct a ramp to enable it to dig out and retrieve the reactor's cellar, stroke nuclear waste. Dutch-owned Shell, quote, Shell Research Limited came into being on the 30th of October 1954, a matter of weeks following the UK Atomic Energy Authority Act becoming law. AEA contracts, stroke agreements would be made with Shell Research Limited, note the inverted commas around Shell. On the 10th of December 1968, a matter of days after Shell Thornton's nuclear decommissioning was complete, Shell Research Limited held an extraordinary general meeting and passed a special resolution so that the inverted commas around Shell and Shell Research Limited were removed, and thus Shell Research Limited was created, i.e. it was no longer a Shell company, if you excuse the pun, but now Shell Research Limited became a Shell Group company. On the 12th of December 1968, Shell's second arm of its Thornton nuclear decommissioning cover-up proceeded, having sought out and hired a criminal with a previous nuclear dumping record, then paying him in excess of £300,000 cash if one includes Thornton's nuclear decommissioning scrap. Curley's company, Mersey Dismantling and Demolition Limited, now needed to be killed so no official record of Shell's relationship with Curley Fish Gold would exist. So as Shell's decommissioning proceeded, Mersey Demolition was in the process of being bankrupt as per plan. Note, not voluntary bankruptcy, that might at some future date arouse suspicion. No, Curley's company was being compulsory wound up as per plan. One of the consequences of a company going into receivership is that its bank accounts are all frozen, instantly frozen, so that Shell could not, I repeat, could not have paid Curley Fish Gold by cheque.
Curley bought the Rolls Royce after Thornton. Was it a good Rolls Royce?
It wasn't a new one, no.
No, but it was
a good one.
Was it?
Yeah. Oh, it was a big show, you know what I mean, yeah.
In 1993, award-winning journalist and author Laurie Flynn introduced me to 2020 television.
Simon, I first came into contact with you when you were at 2020. Can you tell me a little bit about it, please?
Yes, at that time I was the editor of an ITV primetime current affairs programme called The Big Story, which 2020 television was commissioned by Carlton to make for the ITV network. This was after the franchise changes a year or so before, when Thames lost their franchise and Carlton took their franchise. And we ran about 20 episodes a year, which was a combination of quickly made current affairs films and a smaller number of investigations. And the story of the Thornton research station was a long-term investigation which we put considerable resources into at the time, with yourself and producer Laurie Flynn, who I'd known from World in Action days. We decided to make a real effort to research this story and see how far we could get, with the view we hoped to being able to put a film on ITV about what had happened.
Shell's response was fronted by former BBC watchdog and Newsnight presenter Fran Morrison. Upon her appointment as head of media relations, Miss Morrison was proclaiming that with her in charge, Shell would not only have an open media position, it would confront bad news.
Be sure of your facts, not just for reasons of libel, but also because if you get it wrong, or if you're exaggerating, or you've made a mistake, and you're saying, you could create a lot of fear that might be unjustified. So we got to a point, believing Shell to be a responsible public company, which had purported to have a strong ethical front, that we would write to Shell very honestly and say, here is some evidence that we've got and about this facility at Thornton, and we would like to have your comments on it.
Upon the news of the TV nuclear dumping programme, Miss Morrison engaged Shell's new open media confront bad news strategy by filing a series of complaints to the independent television regulator, the ITC, Thornton TV and 2020 television, while at the same time declining any Shell interviews. Shell's much-delayed strategy of attacking the messenger, feigned no knowledge of any nuclear dumpings and only recently claiming to be aware of my research findings, combined with the citing of the ITC Code of Practice as another arm of its discredit the messenger policy. Shell's other deeply offensive threat was that programme producer Laurie Flynn and I had abused elderly Shell pensioners. Furthering Shell's discredit the messenger policy, Miss Morrison wrote to Carlton's commissioning editor, Marion Bowman, detailing 2 examples of alleged abuse. First example given was Mr. Brian Bradbury. After viewing the recorded rushes, Carlton's commissioning editor was able to reject Shell's fabricated abuse allegations. The second alleged abuse complaint concerned Mr. Eric Otten, that is, Lieutenant Commander Eric Harold Otten, RN, who while serving as a Royal Navy officer was stationed at Shell Thornton Research Centre in the 1960s. The reason Shell had fabricated abuse allegations concerning Bradbury and Otten was that A. Bradbury was the man they had used to pass Shell's nuclear dumping instructions on to Alan Dixon. Furthermore, he had handed him the 3 cash cheque, and most certainly had handed Curly Fishgold his cheque. Although a completely innocent used party in Shell's nuclear dumping crimes, Mr. Bradbury had panicked and given changed accounts of subsequent days. Lieutenant Commander Eric Otten had confirmed Shell Thornton's nuclear reactor in his strontium-90, but at first claimed he did not know what the SR-90 was used for, to both myself and producer Laurie Flynn. Consequently, Shell needed to disqualify these interviews. Gone through my rubbish on a regular basis, tapped my phone, warned countless people about me, Shell were now having the audacity to fabricate allegations that I had abused them, the largest company on the planet. It was beyond parody. However, the real abusers...
Mate one night, and this little fella come in with a pinstripe suit and had hat, a bowler hat, and he said, have you got, Edward Matthew Ingle, he said. I said, yeah, that's me. And he said, you've got family, haven't you? I said, yeah, I've got family. He said, well, about that Shell job, you want to just shut your mouth, he said, or things might happen. That's all I remember. He was only a little fella, but he was well dressed, dicky bow on, and I don't know whether Shell sent someone or he was one of them, or I don't know. I shut up after that. That's why I didn't even want to know after that. I thought to myself, friggin' hell, I got to do my family in.
Shell's panic continued as he filed a seemingly endless series of factors, calls, letters, etc., mostly concerning myself, to the ICT, the Independent Television Commission, Carlton Television, 2020 Television, and anybody else they could rope in. The television programme had been scheduled to be aired on the 10th of February 1994. On the 7th of February 1994, Shell forwarded its 2,900-word narrative to set out the group's official defence. Shell's narrative asserted that, yes, Curly Fishgold's company, Mersey Dismantling and Demolition Co. Limited, had carried out the work for them, as per set out in 1968. But it was not the decommissioning of a nuclear reactor. Instead, it was the decommissioning, demolition of a Coal Boat 60 lab labyrinth. In which case, Shell were correct, if that was the truth, that there was no story, because this, even if it had been carried out in an unauthorised manner, did not pose a threat.
And what had happened in 1968. And to cut a long story short, the letter claims, or the letter stated, that all of these bits of evidence and recollections that you had found from people involved in 1968 related entirely to a cobalt-60 labyrinth.
Shell's narrative of the 7th of February, kill the programme, the television programme, dead. That was its purpose, that was why it was constructed. The question was it true? Was it really true, as page after page after page of this states, that the problem in 1968, insofar as it ever was a problem, was a misidentification by Allen, etc., etc. That they hadn't decommissioned a nuclear reactor, nuclear power. What they'd taken away was a cobalt-60 laboratory. I now needed to verify or otherwise Shell's narrative. Shell were correct. They did, in as far as they did have a cobalt-60 labyrinth at Thornton, and they had used allegedly this cobalt-60 as part of its project in perfecting the world's first atomic lubricants. Despite having obtained a document showing that Thornton's cobalt-60 labyrinth was designed and built to house kilocuries of cobalt-60, thousands of curies of cobalt-60, Shell's Thornton cobalt-60 only ever housed a minute 240 curies. The Curie was named after Marie and Pierre Curie. A Curie is defined as 37 billion disintegrations per second, hence the more Curies, the more activity. The heat and radioactivity in a nuclear power reactor almost defies the human imagination. Thus Shell would have to subject and prove that their APL atomic power lubricants were able to sustain a long-term nuclear power reactor's environment prior to their launch. Shell could not have developed and authenticated their APL range with its Thornton 240 Curie cobalt-60 labyrinth plus Harwell's 1940s repo reactor, as per its claims. Esso, as Shell's other UK rivals, had no secret reactor, so consequently they were forced to actually use a cobalt-60 source. Here is Esso's Dr. Michael Hall exposing lubricants to realistic levels of cobalt-60. To demonstrate Thornton's 240 Curie inadequacy, mini 300 Curie portable cobalt-60 units were being used towed round United States university departments. Yet the world's largest transnational oil corporation is claiming to have developed a range of atomic lubricants with a cobalt power source less than that used by university students. Shell had actually made a small PR movie about Shell's cobalt-60 labyrinth. And footage of it was available for the British Film Institute. So I arranged for Alan Dixon to go and view it on his own. I did not go with him, and I simply told Alan to tell me what he saw. Now Alan was a very intuitive man, and he wrongly assumed that for him the postponed TV programme would be resurrected because I must have, he assumed, have found footage of the reactor. Otherwise I wouldn't be sending him following his stroke all the way to London. Upon his return, he was very upset. He simply said to me, "You've got this wrong. This isn't it."
In a nuclear power station, all sorts of mechanisms have to work while exposed to radiation, and these have to be lubricated. Some of the mechanisms will be in regions of intense radiation, where ordinary lubricants are changed to this. This waxy mess was a free-flowing lubricating oil before it was subjected to radiation. How to develop lubricants that resist radiation? Thornton started to work on this problem early in 1953, and the work has been going on ever since. As the next step, Thornton set up their own radioactive source, so that the tests could be handled more easily. The test cell is at the end of a concrete labyrinth. The source is a slug of cobalt-60, which can be withdrawn into a concrete shield when handling samples.
Shell Thornton are doing here is putting different oil samples in Pyrex tubes, then placing the Pyrex tubes around cobalt-60 source, leaving the Pyrex tube oil samples for months on end. Then after several months they're coming in, retrieving the Pyrex tubes and then examining the oil sample. If Shell are to be believed, they developed the world's first atomic power lubricant with the aid of these Pyrex. Shell Thornton are not content with developing and marketing the world's first range of atomic power lubricants, all apparently with the part-time aid of Harwell's BEPO low-powered, air-cooled 1940s research reactor, and not forgetting, of course, Pyrex's invaluable contribution, sadly overlooked by modern-day historians. In reality, Shell would have had restricted access to Harwell's 1940s BEPO reactor, for Thornton would have had to pre-book an appointment, agreed reactor times, uses, etc., etc. However, by its very nature, developing a set of lubricants that would stand enormous doses of nuclear radiation and hitherto unknown heat lubrication reactor environments forbid any preordained plans. Under these circumstances, it would be very much a suck it and see, test and retest situation in an environment that would replicate the lubricant's uses. For the long-term safety of nuclear power reactors demands that any set of lubricants are pre-subjected to the violent environment of a nuclear power reactor prior to their launch. Now only armed with an antiquated 1940s low-powered air-cooled reactor and Thornton's Pyrex tube, cobalt-60, Shell have not only developed and marketed the world's first atomic power lubricants, they are claiming filing advanced nuclear power reactor patents. The first time I ever informed any of the decommissioning workers about Shell's narrative was in December 2013 when I showed up unannounced at Derek Dixon's door and asked him to view some photos.
No, that, to be honest, I don't recall that sheet.
Put it on the non...
So they're the ones that are most...
You see the last one that you've rejected?
Yeah.
That's the one Shell claimed a narrative that you demolished.
No.
A brick building, essentially. Now you had a drop 955K or a 955. A drop 955, as I understand, would simply have pushed that over. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Eventually they had to get the heaviest crane up in the UK from the northeast of England. Do you remember that?
I remember that very well, yeah.
Now, what would that have done to this building?
To the building we had?
No, to the cobalt-60.
It would have totally destroyed it.
Yeah.
It would be overkill. Needed.
Are you surprised that Shell would confuse the building you demolished and the cobalt-60?
Well, I'd be very surprised, yes.
In 1998, I tracked down the builder of Thornton's cobalt-60 labyrinth, who not only confirmed that he was the builder, he confirmed its demolition. It was demolished by two men with crowbars leaving it apart. I had also established that it was still in existence in 1985, i.e. Shell's labyrinth was still in existence 17 years after the decommissioning in 1968. I'd also tracked down and interviewed a former Thornton head who'd confirmed the construction of Thornton's nuclear reactor because, quote, they needed more activity. He also correctly identified its location, the building, etc., etc., and he also recalled the demolition / decommission. On the 9th of September 1998, I wrote to Shell in order to afford it the opportunity to act in a responsible manner, following the group's killing of the television programme in '94. Now, Shell and other its agents has not ceased its activities against me since the TV programme's cancellation. Therefore, they knew my progress was such that Shell's cobalt-60 narrative would be difficult to sustain. Managing Director Chris Fay did not respond. Instead, I received a reply from Shell's legal head, Richard Wiseman. 3 weeks after receiving my opening letter of September 98, Shell started to abandon its Cobalt 60 narrative, with its legal head Richard Wiseman writing that Shell will stand by its narrative unless I have additional material. And the truth in this matter is an absolute, i.e. if the Cobalt 60 was demolished in 1968 as per Shell's narrative, no additional material could alter that fact. First of all, the head of Thornton was sacked, David Allison Parks. Fran Morrison was moved on. She devoted her talents to defending the tobacco industry. She became a representative of British American Tobacco. Several Shell directors were sacked. And then Richard Wiseman, Shell's legal head, legal head of Shell, informed me, quote, an honest mistake had been made. An honest mistake had been made, according to the Shell, because in 1994, faced with the TV programme, the only nuclear building Shell had was the Cobalt 60. So they framed this 2,900 word response narrative as the Cobalt 60. And when the television company didn't correct Shell, Shell presumed, this is according to Richard Wiseman, they must have got it correct because we hadn't corrected them. He told me this in all seriousness. And consequently, now that I had corrected them, they were abandoning the narrative because they'd made an honest mistake. This is a total and absolute nonsense. What actually happened is, in 1994, Shell had got hold of an illegal copy of the script, the television script. And with this illegal copy, they fabricated the narrative. And they fabricated the narrative to fit in with what these workers, the decommissioning workers, had told us, especially with the tubes. There were dozens and dozens of tubes on the decommissioning. There were 3 tubes on the Cobalt 60. Actually, there was only ever 1 used. There were 2 spare tubes in the event of one of the tubes becoming jammed. And so they fabricated, word for word, this narrative in order to explain away the events of 1968 and thereby kill the TV programme. Now that its Cobalt 60 narrative had collapsed, Shell needed to put an innocent spin on its construction. Hence the necessity for the honest mistake line from its legal head. It is important to note that it is essential for Shell to have an innocent explanation for the Cobalt 60 narrative's construction in 1994. For having sought out and engaged criminals with a previous nuclear dumping record to dispose of its Thornton nuclear waste in 1968, the group could be facing criminal conspiracy charges if it were to acknowledge that it knowingly constructed a fraudulent narrative in 1994. Shell now needed to act in a way that could present as a genuine investigation stroke responsible manner. In furtherance of the group's We Are Acting Responsible agenda, I was invited to attend a meeting at Thornton Research Centre. I accepted the meeting on one condition, that it was taped. The meeting took place on the 12th of January 1999. In attendance were Thornton's head, Graham Sweeney, Ian Lampart, head of medical services, Shell UK, and Hugh Dorrance, Shell safety officer. The meeting lasted approximately 3 hours. However, it quickly became clear to me this was not a genuine explanation of the Thornton 1960 events, but a Shell phishing PR exercise. Following the 12th of January meeting, the promised tapes never materialised. So I forcibly requested my copies. A set of tapes were then mailed. However, they were the wrong tapes. More delay. Eventually, Shell personnel turned up at my home with the correct tapes. Unfortunately, Shell's tape machine had an apparent intermittent fault. It turned out to be a very unusual fault in that all the meeting points that would cause Shell embarrassment were not recorded. Hugh Dorrance had the gall to write and inform me that I would remember the tape machine's failure. Needless to say, Shell had carefully censored the tape. At the Thornton meeting, I had supplied Shell with a number of facts so they could quickly authenticate the 1968 nuclear reactor decommissioning. Thornton's head had agreed to check my supplied authentication facts. He could hardly do any less, as the whole point of the exercise meeting was to afford Shell cover protection so that they could maintain its We Are Now Acting Responsible line following the collapse of its Cobalt 60 narrative. However, Shell realised that any inquiry into my supplied facts would reveal the truth, so they refused any investigation investigation, full stop, despite Sweeney's undertaking. When I wrote to inquire as to the result of the promised inquiry, Thornton's head, Graham Sweeney, passed my correspondence on so that I could no longer contact him. A deep black comedy then ensued. Graham Sweeney, unable to reply to my inquiry as to how Shell's promised inquiry was going, for he could hardly state the truth that Shell had no intention of holding any inquiry promised investigation into its nuclear reactor dumping. So instead, Shell's legal head responded. Wiseman, of course, completely ignored Shell's promised Thornton investigation into my supplied evidence. Now, Richard Wiseman, stepping in due to Graham Sweeney developing the inability to respond to my correspondence, himself caused Sweeney's inability to respond condition. For when I wrote and requested Richard Wiseman forward a statement of truth that Shell did not house a nuclear reactor testing cell, he, having caught the Sweeney bug, lost the ability to respond. Instead, Freeman, Shell's lawyers, responded when I requested Freeman's forward a statement of truth regarding Shell's nuclear dumpings, unable, as it were, to pass it on down the line. Poor Freeman's were like some beached whale, stranded. In the meantime, I contacted British American Tobacco's new media head, Fran Morrison.
Hello?
Hello, is that Fran Morrison?
Yeah.
Hi, my name's John Dyer. Have Shell informed you?
No, sorry, what's your name?
My name's John Dyer, D-Y-E-R.
Yeah.
You made all sorts of allegations that I'd had elderly Shell pensioners, you maybe remember.
I'm afraid I don't remember the details.
No.
You'll have to remind me.
Well, basically, you dumped a nuclear reactor. Shell did, not you personally, of course. In 1968, and you employed known criminals, and you paid them extensive cash payments in order to carry it out. It was under Rothschild.
I recall that
You remember.
Shell didn't support this view whatsoever, Mr. Dyer.
No, you made a total lie up, a piece of fiction. You said it was the Cobalt 60.
I can't really be accountable for that.
At this time, Shell had fully engaged its reacting more responsible line, which had its more farcical moments. Here is Shell's legal head playing one of our nuclear reactors' missing role.
I really am trying to exhaust our records. One thing is absolutely clear. There are no relevant records in Thornton anymore, and that's been one of my problems, and I'm trying to go through whatever records are available elsewhere in our organisation and elsewhere to try, and I am shooting in the dark. Sort of thousands of tons that you're talking about would have represented quite a major building. We can't even work out where it was supposed to have been.
We have just heard Shell's legal head stating there are no nuclear records at Thornton and elsewhere. Yet 5 years earlier, Shell had produced, or rather constructed, a 2,900-word Cobalt 60 narrative to refute nuclear decommissioning charges. Now, 5 years after killing the television programme, here is Shell's legal head stating that the Shell Group have no 1960s nuclear records. I say had because it is impossible to believe that Shell would have discarded any Cobalt 60 narrative record following mass nuclear dumping allegations by a mainstream TV company. If they had no nuclear records at Thornton in 93-94, as has just been confirmed by Richard Wiseman, Shell's legal head, perhaps he'd now like to tell us why they constructed, or how they constructed, a 2,900-word narrative stroke alibi without any evidence. An ongoing part of Shell's strategy was its constant we must have demands, we must see demands. For whenever I'd refused a Shell demand, Shell heads would write demanding that if progress was to be made, I must agree to that which I'd just declined. On each and every occasion I conceded to Shell's demands, they were dropped. A constant Shell ultimatum was its we must see your evidence stroke witnesses. This despite the fact that Shell already knew the identification of a great number of them. Seeing as Shell were not dropping their we must see ultimatums, I wrote to its legal head. You've just heard Shell's legal head state that Shell no longer have any nuclear files. So therefore, any appointed academic could freely search any Shell company and find nothing. That is, if Richard Wiseman is telling the truth. At the same time, Shell's appointed academic would have automatic access to all my files. So Shell would have nothing to lose. However, as soon as I mentioned independent examination of Shell's files, this option was ruled out in a quite extraordinary manner. That is, not in the usual corporate bull letter. We regret to say the confidentiality are involved, etc. No, I received a phone call, a fax and a letter informing all within the same day that this door was not to be opened under any circumstances. Despite Shell sending in their legal heavies, I concluded that the legal stroke court action might be the best possible course of action to ensure justice. When I expressed my fears to the group's legal head that Shell would not allow the issue to be addressed via court action, but would knock me out, bankrupt me, by legal technicalities, Richard Wiseman responded, and I quote, "Why should we do that, Mr. Dyer, as we have not attempted to do that in the past? With Shell's undertakings, I perceive..." The ink had barely time to dry when Shell's undertaking that they would allow the substantial issue to be addressed in court was dishonoured. However, in responding to my draft claim, Shell's employed lawyers, Freemans, ended their letter with a demand / requirement that I enclose their letter when I, to quote Freeman's, attempt to issue proceedings. Freeman / Shell's letter needed to be filed along with issue proceedings to warn them off the media. Incidentally, all nuclear dumpings are denied by Shell and Freeman's response, despite its legal head informing that Shell no longer has any nuclear dumping records or any nuclear records of the events in Thornton in the 1960s. I responded that in order for them to demand that I lodge Freeman / Shell's response letter, I required a statement of truth from a Shell director that their response contents letter nuclear denials were true. Needless to say, no Shell director was willing to sign an affidavit. Consequently, Freeman's instantly withdrew their demand / requirement. Could not happen for Shell to defeat me in court on technicalities. Then the group would be able to portray me as some failed litigant, embittered litigant, who'd had his day in court and had failed because what I was saying was wrong, unsubstantiated. Now Shell had issued all sorts of threats against me, legal threats and other threats, but legal threats. Shell said they would take whatever action it sees fit in order to protect its reputation from false attacks. They, this is Freeman, Shell, would however have no hesitation in protecting their reputation from defamatory attacks. So I changed tact and I made myself a website. I then registered the website, nuclearcrimes.com. I then sent Shell CD copies of the website to Royal Dutch Shell and Shell UK and its lawyers and Freeman's. And I gave Shell 7 days in which to respond. Now this website CD is precisely as the website is. You put the CD in the CD drawer and you click on the hyperlinks and it all comes up. So Shell had 7 days in which to defend themselves, issue writs. I told them, if they issue a writ, I will not put it up until it's decided, because no writs were forthcoming. However, as soon as I put the site up, I got a PP letter, a weasel letter from Richard Wiseman. ULR would be helpful. It was helpful so that Shell and Freeman's could issue threats against Easy Space, my then web host, in order to get Nuclear Crimes closed. Following Shell's pressure, Easy Space folded, Nuclear Crimes was pulled. I tried another couple of hosts. Then I had the good fortune to find Knightsbridge Online, a remarkable company. A company that had everything to lose, nothing to gain financially. Knightsbridge took the view, Shell were not prepared to sue me, they weren't prepared to censor me.
We used this continuously, non-stop, because it was such a good reference.
And did any of these references ever come back and say Shell had queried this term?
No, never.
I needed to verify otherwise Alan Dixon's insistence, long-term insistence, that Shell were a party to Curly Fishgold subcontracting the decommissioning to him. So that I now needed to establish that Shell were aware that Alan Dixon's company, CNC Demolition, actually carried out the decommissioning. Previously stated, Alan Dixon that he was the only man in the country who had ever demolished the strontium-90 radioactive testing cell. Raymond Albert Costley, Ray Costley, did all of CNC's demolition tenders post-Thornton. Alan always insisted, as Ray has confirmed, that CNC's first tender reference would always be its demolition of Shell Thornton's radioactive strontium-90 testing cell. The Port of Time Authority not only confirmed that Alan and Ray's accounts were correct, they also confirmed that Shell Thornton had acknowledged, written back, confirming the reference, and CNC Demolition had complied with all Shell MEX regulations while carrying out the work in 1968. By confirming Alan Dixon's references to the Port of Tyne Authority in this instance, although there were many others, established the truth of Alan Dixon's contention that it was he and his workers that actually carried out Shell Thornton's decommissioning. Furthermore, when Alan states
of that site meeting, we were simply told to carry on and send the lot off.
Thornton's positive reference response validates the fact that Alan was actually carrying out Shell's orders when dumping its nuclear waste. For he was, and I quote, complying with all Shell MEX regulations. Now, if Alan Dixon had gone against Shell's wishes or in any way behind their back, then self-evidently Shell's reference response would have been wholly different. Shell did not want Curley's face to be known on the Thornton site for self-evident reasons. They wanted his expertise, they wanted his lack of morals, they wanted the fact that he would dump thousands of tons of nuclear waste without any qualms, but they did not wish him to be widely seen and known on the Thornton site, hence the subcontracting to Alan Dixon, hence the cash payments, hence Curley's company being put into receivership, hence the great lengths that Shell went to hide their criminality. Hence Curley coming regularly to the Thornton site to pick up personal cash cheques. Hence Shell employing Muscle to physically threaten an old man and his family. Hence it employing DJ Freeman to issue its legal threats. Hence the construction of a criminal narrative in order to kill a prime-time, mainstream television programme.
The building in the picture that you've just chosen is a nuclear reactor.
By the end of 2013, my research was coming to a conclusion. I had not seen or spoken to Derek Dixon for at least 10 years. On the 8th of December 2013, I went over to see Derek.
Please confirm that the document in front of you have never had sight of before. Folder.
I can, yeah.
And I haven't given you any information, prior information, what I've got to ask you to do, have I?
No.
And I've turned up out of the blue, is that correct?
That's correct.
Derek, can you open that folder, please? And can you look through the pictures? And if there's anything there that reminds you of Thornton, the demolition job, put it to one side and mark it. If there isn't, don't be afraid to say no. If none of them are...
It's gone now. Fingers somewhere very well. Remember that one.
Remind you of?
Yeah, remind me of it.
Okay, looks like. And if you could just speak up slightly, Derek, I don't know. If it doesn't, put it to the other side.
Yes, that brings memories back of the size and the shape of the thing.
Right.
That is very similar to the size and shape of what we took away. That's very good, but there were a few tubes coming through the walls, but I couldn't really remember at this stage exactly what.
Well, you just tell the truth, there's no problems. Derek, the ones that you're not sure of, put it the opposite side. Take that one away. Only the ones, take two piles, so there's absolutely no possibility of getting confused myself.
Yes, that's how they were dressed.
Now, can you just show that to the camera, please? Is that precise, roughly how they were dressed up?
Roughly how they were dressed.
Yeah, but that immediately brings to mind, does it, how they were?
Yeah. It's difficult after all this time to be precise. That's
Okay, we'll put that with the recognised, please.
These drums were there. That's exactly what they look like.
Just forgive me, Dave. Are you positive that's what they were like?
That's exactly what they look like, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we were supposed to put in, but in fact we didn't put anything in.
Mm.
I would say that is the best copy of the building. That's,
Would you place it on the top, please?
Yeah.
What you picked out, Derek, are nuclear reactors.
Because if it's the case that a very plausible eyewitness, plus other eyewitnesses that you have interviewed, is saying that what Shell are claiming to be the Cobalt-60 labyrinth is absolutely not the building that they demolished, then very grave questions emerge as to what was the building they demolished. And those questions become even more grave when we have a situation where eyewitnesses say, actually, it looked exactly like this in the photograph, which is a graphite research station. So I think it is now incumbent upon Shell to look back at this matter, to review the letter of 7th of February 1994, and we need to know the truth.
The said letter that you're talking about, the narrative of the 7th of February, was, and I quote, an honest mistake.
I think if you have been told by Shell's head of legal affairs or former head of legal affairs that the narrative was an honest mistake, let's analyse that question. If it was a mistake, we need to know what the truth is. If it was a mistake, we need to know what the mistake is. And so it is therefore vital, in the light of that admission, that those questions are answered. The question then becomes as to whether or not it's an honest mistake. I can't answer that because I can't tell you the motivation of those who were involved in drafting this letter. I can't tell you what they knew. Is it possible that they simply didn't know what had been happening in Thornton? Is it possible that they chose not to know? I cannot answer that question, but I think the key point there is if there's an admission that there was a mistake, whether or not it was honest is another matter, but if there's an admission that there was a mistake, then we need to know what the mistake is and we need to know what the truth is.
My question to Richard Wiseman, my follow-up question, well, if it wasn't the Cobalt-60 labyrinth that was demolished in 1968, as you're now stating, what was demolished? And up to now, there's been a deafening silence.
Well, precisely.
14 years after Richard Wiseman's withdrawal of Shell's sham narrative of February 94, I am still requesting Shell to state precisely which nuclear building they had decommissioned in 1968.
That actually is one of the issues that we're looking at, because the sort of thousands of tons that you're talking about would have represented quite a major building. We can't even work out where it was supposed to have been.
Question of Shell's honest mistake line. However, I was not prepared for Shell's legal head to claim that they were unable to locate its nuclear site.
Well, I was up Helsby Hill and...
Why was you up there?
Well, I go there quite often. It's only 20 minutes drive from the house.
And is it a beauty spot or something?
A beauty spot, yeah. You see right over the Mersey. You can also see right across Shell. And at the time, one of the occasions I was up the hill, you could observe work going on in the Shell Research Centre where they were digging with machinery, excavating the ground and sending it out. And they later on they evened the ground off.
But
and over a period...
Sending what out?
What they were digging up.
Yeah, but why has this got of any interest?
Well, it was of interest to me because that is the site we worked on and levelled out ourselves.
Right, where the nuclear...
Where the nuclear facility was. And to see them at a later stage digging this away, it just gave me the idea they were going to build on it, which I presume they have done.
Now, was this after the cancelled television programme of 93?
Oh, yeah.
Thornton's decommissioned nuclear site had remained fallow since 1968. Remained fallow, that is, until the killing of the TV programme. But after the programme was killed, the grounds that housed Shell's former complex was dug out, removed and carted away. Shell then imported fresh material to fill in and finally level off its former nuclear site. Yet a matter of months later, Shell's legal head is telling me that neither Shell nor Thornton can locate the site. It's important to understand the events post the cancelled TV programme. Shell, after a suitable time, dug up and removed and replaced its former nuclear location with fresh materials. What happened to that waste, we'd like to know. But more importantly, they sold off Stanlow and they gave away to Chester University Thornton Research Station, i.e. they've cleared out. Now Shell's strategy is the Grim Reaper. They want and they expect people like me to die off and they'll bluff it out until we're dead, and therefore, like it's waste, it'll all be buried. Now it's up to us not to allow that to happen. I say us because I need volunteers. I've been at this virtually single-handedly for 30 years. I've produced this programme on my own that you're now watching. I've produced the website Nuclear Crimes on my own. But I can't do the next things on my own. I need help. I need dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of volunteers to fight the next election, because we're going to stand in Andrew Miller's Ellesmere Port and Nesting constituency. Now the TV producer Laurie Flynn and I went to see Andrew Miller. I've got his card somewhere, some faded card. He had absolutely no interest whatsoever in the dumpings, the nuclear dumpings. He just presumably wanted a quiet life. But there's no more quiet life for him nor Shell. Furthermore, what we're going to have to do is to send DVDs out to all the media, large media institutions throughout the Western world and maybe further afield. So it widely gets known. We're going to post it on the internet, of course. And we're going to give copies of this, if electoral laws will permit, to each and every household in the constituency that we're standing for, Ellesmere Port and Neston. Then we're going to send copies to Shell's institutional shareholders, so they'll become aware of the reality that faces them. Prior to this, incidentally, I've sent Shell copies of this, Shell sent DVDs of this, and I pleaded with Shell to act responsible. I don't wish any of this to happen. Shell could avoid this just by acting responsible and facing up to reality and confronting an unpalatable past. But they have absolutely no interest, no moral compulsion. Full copies of this programme, I received not a single acknowledgement. So I wrote to Shell requesting that they'd received the DVDs. Still no reply. So I phoned the present legal head, Michael Coates, on the 19th of November.
Hi, Mr. Coates. My name's John Dyer. Can you confirm, please, that you received these DVDs? Hello?
I'm sorry, but the person you've called is not available. Please leave your message after the tone. When you've left your message, just hang up, or for more options, press 1 at any time.
Mr. Coates, I'd be very much obliged if you didn't put the phone down on me, please. I just want you to confirm that you've received these DVDs, because I just want to confirm that Shell have received the DVDs, please. Thank you.
Shell's current policy appears to be that no head is allowed to speak to me, especially its legal head. However, my brief call did necessitate a Shell acknowledgement that it had actually received the DVDs. Paying to boycott Shell's products. All of this will happen very, very quickly. Now I need volunteers. I need volunteers desperately. So I'm depending on you people that have seen this, by the hundreds of thousands who've seen the website. The British people by the tens of thousands, maybe by millions worldwide. So I need volunteers, and I need it urgently. People with political experience know how to fight an election. Because I don't.
Have you ever studied nuclear physics?
No, never. No.
What do you know of nuclear physics?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Prior to this job, have you ever heard of strontium-90?
I may have heard it in passing, but as far as I can recall, no, never. No.
Strontium-90 mentioned on more than one occasion.
Oh yeah, yeah, many, many occasions. I would say that everyone on the job, all the demolition workers, certainly knew that the whole purpose of the job was to remove these strontium-90 contaminated tubes. But at that particular time, we didn't know what strontium-90 was.
I know this is a difficult subject for you, but I believe your wife had some trouble.
Yes, shortly after the completion of this demolition contract at Thornton Research Centre, my wife had 2 pregnancies terminated due to the fact that the children hadn't formed properly in the womb. On the last occasion, I did not accept what the doctors were saying and demanded to see the unborn child, which I did see, and they were quite right. The baby hadn't formed properly.
Have you had any surviving children post Thornton?
No, no.
Was it your wife's and your desire to have no children?
Yes, it was. Definitely, yes.
Is there any other members of your family who've experienced anything like that?
Yes, my brother Derek Dixon, who was my foreman on Thornton Research Centre, also had the same experience, or a similar experience, where the fetus hadn't formed properly.
And prior to Thornton, had he, to your knowledge, had any difficulty?
No, none whatsoever. He had many children.
How often were the wagons arriving and going?
I would say a wagon would leave possibly every 20 minutes, half hour, something like that.
Throughout the day?
Throughout the day, 5 days a week, week after week, month after month.
All taking that waste away?
Every bit. There must have literally been thousands of tons sent off.
And did anybody express any concern?
No. Shell had no interest whatsoever where the waste went. None at all.
Did they know it was being shifted off site?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, to get off the site you had to go through their security anyway. So yeah, they certainly knew what was coming onto the site, what was going off the site.
Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the flowers gone? Young girls pick them, every one. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Where have all the young girls gone? Long time passing. Where have all the young girls gone? Long time ago. Where have all the young girls gone? Gone to young men, every one. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Where have all the young men gone? Long time passing. Where have all the young men gone? Long time ago. Where have all the young men gone? Gone for soldiers, every one. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Where have all the soldiers gone? long time ago. Where have all the soldiers gone? Gone to graveyards, everyone. When will